The Galactic Academy station floated in the darkness of space, like a giant silver wheel spinning slowly around a pale moon. Inside its gleaming corridors walked the children of diplomats and leaders from hundreds of different worlds. The station was supposed to be the safest place in the galaxy where young ones from every species could learn together in peace. Tommy Park sat at his desk in the mathematics classroom trying to understand the equation floating in holographic light above his tablet. He was 7 years old with black hair and bright, curious eyes that seemed too large for his small face. Around him sat children who looked nothing like him. Some had scales and others had feathers. A few glowed softly in colors that hurt to look at directly. But Tommy had learned to see past the differences. They were just kids like him trying to figure out impossible math problems. The teacher was a Elixian named Crystal in Form 17, but everyone just called her Miss Crystal. She was made of living glass that chimed softly when she moved. She was explaining something about quantum probabilities when the door to the classroom exploded inward. 3 massive figures filled the doorway. They stood over 9 feet tall with bodies covered in black armor that seemed to be part of their skin. Their heads were angular and fierce, with mandibles that clicked together, making sounds like breaking bones. These were Vryn warriors, and everyone in the galaxy knew what that meant. The Vryn Collective considered themselves the greatest fighters in all of known space. They had conquered their entire sector of the galaxy 3,000 years ago, and no one had challenged them since Miss Crystal froze in place. Her body stopped chiming and went completely silent. The children in the classroom made various sounds of fear. Some hissed and others chirped in distress. Tommy just stared at the creatures with wide eyes, not quite understanding what was happening. Delayed, Vryn warrior scanned the room with eyes that glowed an angry red. When those eyes locked onto Tommy, the creature moved forward with frightening speed. Tommy tried to stand, but his legs would not obey him. He felt frozen like a small animal watching a predator approach, knowing there was nowhere to run. The warrior reached down with a clawed hand that could have crushed Tommy's entire head and grabbed him by the shoulder. The grip was firm, but not painful. Tommy let out a small sound of surprise as he was lifted from his buyers seat like he weighed nothing at all. Miss Crystal finally found her voice, and it came out as a high-pitched chiming sound of distress, but she did not move to stop them. She could not. The Vryn warriors had diplomatic immunity, which meant they could do almost anything they wanted without consequences. It was one of the strange rules that governed how different species dealt with each other in space. Tommy was carried out of the classroom and into the corridor. He could hear Miss Crystal activating the emergency alert system, but the warriors did not seem concerned. They moved with practiced efficiency through the station like they had planned this route many times. Other adults saw them pass, but no one tried to stop them. Some turned away. Others watched with expressions that might have been pity or fear. The warriors took Tommy to a section of the station near the docking bays. They entered a large reinforced room with thick metal walls and a door that sealed behind them with a heavy thud. Inside the room was basic furniture and supplies enough for several days. There were also weapons mounted on the walls and automated defense systems that tracked movement with cold, mechanical precision. Tommy was placed in a smaller chamber within the main room. It had a bed and a small bathroom and a force field across the entrance that shimmered like heat waves on a hot day. He could see out, but he could not pass through. The lead warrior looked down at him and spoke in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. The translation device in Tommy's ear converted the sounds into words he could understand. "You will not be harmed, human child. You will remain here for 3 days. Then you will be returned to your people. This is a message to your species about respecting the power of the Vryn Collective." Tommy did not cry. His mother had taught him that crying did not solve problems. Instead, he sat on the bed and tried to think about what she would do in this situation. His mother was Emily Park, and she worked as a human diplomat, helping their species negotiate with aliens about trade and territory, and all sorts of complicated grown-up things. What Tommy did not know was that his mother had another job before she became a diplomat. She had been a Marine in the United States military back on Earth. Not just any Marine, but one of the special ones who did the hardest and most dangerous missions. She had spent 12 years learning how to fight and survive in impossible situations. The emergency alert from the Academy station traveled through space faster than light carried by communication relays that stretched across the galaxy. It reached the trade summit where Emily Park was sitting in a boring meeting about tariff regulations 3-star systems. Away. Emily was looking at a datapad pretending to pay attention to a Rothian ambassador droning on about import taxes when her personal communicator vibrated. She glanced down at the message, and her face went completely still. Not angry or scared, just still like a lake before a storm. She stood up without saying a word and walked out of the conference room. Behind her, she could hear the Rothian ambassador asking if everything was all right, but she did not respond. She was already making calls, pulling up contact information for people she had not spoken to in years. Within minutes, she had confirmed the details. Her son had been taken by Vryn warriors. They were holding him in a fortified room on the Academy station. The Galactic authorities were preparing to negotiate for his release through proper diplomatic channels. It would take days, maybe weeks of careful talks and compromises. Emily Park had no intention of waiting that long. She made 7 more calls. 6 of them were answered by people who had served with her in the old days. People who understood that some things were more important than politics or rules or consequences. People who knew what it meant when a brother or sister in arms asked for help. The 7th call was to a ship charter service. She needed the fastest vessel they had, and she needed it immediately. Money was no object. Time was everything. The Galactic authorities tried to stop her. They sent messages warning that any military action would violate about 15 different treaties. They explained that the Vryn had diplomatic immunity. They told her that rushing in would only make things worse. Emily ignored every single warning. She assembled her team and commandeered a courier ship designed to carry urgent messages between worlds. It was fast enough to cover 3 star systems in 4 hours. As they prepared for departure, Emily sent one message to the Vryn warriors holding her son. It was broadcast on all frequencies in all languages so everyone would know what was coming. You have 1 hour to return my son unharmed. After that, I am coming in. The galaxy watched and waited, wondering if the human mother would really dare to attack Vryn warriors. Most species thought she was bluffing. The Vryn certainly did. They had faced down armies and destroyed fleets. What could one human female possibly do to them? They were about to find out. The humans have a saying about creatures called honey badgers. Animals from Earth that will fight anything anywhere without fear or hesitation. The saying goes that honey badgers do not care. Neither do human mothers. The courier ship cut through space like a knife through water, moving faster than most military vessels could match. Inside the cramped cockpit, Emily Park sat in the pilot's seat, her hands steady on the controls, her face showing nothing of the storm raging inside her mind. Behind her in the passenger compartment were 6 other humans. David Kim was a former Navy SEAL who now worked as a mining consultant on the outer colonies. He was tall and quiet, with the kind of calm that came from seeing too much combat. Lisa Chun had served in Army Delta Force before taking a job doing corporate security. She was small like Emily, but moved with the same dangerous grace. The others were similar. Former special operations soldiers who had left military service but never really left a life behind. They had families now and civilian jobs and normal lives. But when Emily called, they had dropped everything and come running. That was what you did for your brothers and sisters in arms. That was the code. Emily had spent the 4-hour flight planning. She pulled up schematics of the Academy station, studying the section where the Vrin were holding Tommy. The room they had chosen was designed to withstand attacks from ship weapons. Its walls were reinforced with alloys that could take direct hits from plasma cannons. The door was rated to resist breaching charges, strong enough to crack open a battleship hull. The Vrin had chosen well. Any conventional assault would take hours and give them plenty of time to activate deadman switches or escape protocols. The station security forces did not have the equipment or training to breach such defenses. That was exactly what the Vrin were counting on. But Emily was not planning a conventional assault. David Kim sat beside her looking at the same schematics. He pointed to a structural weakness where the reinforced walls met the station's outer hull. There was a gap in the armor playing barely 6 inches wide, but it would be enough to run sensor cables through. "We can map the interior before we go in," he said. "Know exactly where they are, where Tommy is, and what weapons they have active." Lisa Chun was checking their equipment. They had brought everything they could carry that would not set off the station's weapon scanners. Breaching charges disguised as mining explosives. Subsonic weapons that fired solid projectiles instead of energy bolts. Flashbangs calibrated for human senses that would overload the more sensitive optical clusters of most alien species. That it was not military-grade gear. Officially, they were all civilians, and this was not an officially sanctioned operation. The human government could deny everything if this went wrong. But unofficially, everyone knew what was happening. The entire diplomatic corps was holding its breath, watching to see if Emily would really do it. The galactic community was watching too. News of the kidnapping had spread across hundreds of worlds. Most species expected the humans to negotiate to follow proper protocols to respect the rules that kept galactic society functioning. That was how civilized species behaved. The Vrin Collective had issued statements claiming their actions were justified responses to human aggression in the trade disputes. They said the child would be returned unharmed after 3 days, when humanity had learned appropriate humility. They spoke of honor and strength and the natural order of things. What the Vrin did not understand was that humans had a very different view of honor. To them, taking a child was not a demonstration of strength. It was the action of cowards who knew they could not win a fair fight. The courier ship arrived at the Academy station with 30 minutes left on Emily's deadline. Station security met them at the docking bay. The security chief was a Mandorian with 6 arms and compound eyes that could see in multiple spectrums. He held up 3 of his hands in a gesture meant to be calming. "You cannot do this," he said through the translation device. "The Vrin have diplomatic immunity. If you attack them, it will cause an interstellar incident. There are proper channels for resolving this situation." Emily looked at him with eyes that had gone flat and cold. "My son has been in that room for 6 hours. Every minute he is, there is another minute he is scared and alone. I gave them an hour. They have chosen not to take it." The security chief moved to block her path, but Emily walked around him. The rest of her team followed, carrying equipment bags that everyone knew contained weapons. The security chief made no move to stop them physically. He could not. Technically, Emily had not broken any laws yet, and he had no authority to detain her. But he sent alerts to every authority he could think of. Within minutes, the Galactic Council was in emergency session. Ambassadors from 300 species debated what should be done. Some demanded that Emily be stopped by force. Others argued that the Vrin had provoked this situation and deserved whatever happened next. While they debated, Emily and her team reached the corridor outside the fortified room. The walls here were bare metal and the lighting was dim. The Vrin had disabled the security cameras in this section, but Emily had expected that. She pulled out a portable scanner and pressed it against the wall. The device sent out pulses of energy that could penetrate most barriers and create a three-dimensional map of what was on the other side. It took 2 minutes to complete the scan. When the image appeared on the small screen, Emily studied it carefully. 3 Vryn warriors inside the main room. Automated defense turrets in each corner set to track and fire on any breach point. Tommy in the smaller chamber behind a force field. The warriors were confident. They had positioned themselves away from the main door, expecting any assault to come from that direction. Emily looked at her team. David and Lisa nodded. They understood the plan without needing it explained. Years of training and combat experience had taught them to think alike in situations like this. The timer on Emily's communicator reached 0. The hour was up. She placed the first breaching charge on the wall. Not on the door where the Vryn expected, but on the wall itself at the point where the structural weakness met the outer hull plating. The charge was small and precisely shaped to blow inward, creating a hole just large enough for a person to fit through. David placed 2 more charges at different points, mapping out a triangle. That would give them multiple entry points and divide the warriors' attention. Lisa set up a portable jamming device that would interfere with the automated defense systems for exactly 3 seconds. Not long, but long enough. Emily checked her weapon one last time. It was a simple kinetic rifle that fired solid rounds accelerated by magnetic force. Old technology by galactic standards, but effective and reliable. The Vryn armor was designed to deflect energy weapons. Solid projectiles were a different problem. She looked at each member of her team, making sure everyone was ready. They looked back at her with expressions that said they would follow her into hell if that was what it took. And in a way that was exactly what they were doing. Emily triggered the charges. The explosions were sharp and loud, tearing through the reinforced walls like they were paper. The Vryn inside had exactly 1 second to react before Emily and her team came through the smoke, moving with speed and precision that years of training had burned into their muscles. The galaxy was about to learn something important about humans. They were not the biggest species or the strongest or the most advanced, but they were the species that had evolved fighting creatures that could kill them in 100 different ways. They were the species that had survived ice ages and plagues and predators by being smarter and faster and more determined than anything else on their planet. And more than anything, they were the species that would burn down the universe to protect their children. The smoke from the breaching charges filled the room in an instant, turning the air thick and gray. The Vryn warriors were already moving, reacting with the speed that had made their species feared across the galaxy. But they were moving toward the main door where they expected the attack to come from. They were not ready for 3 simultaneous breaches in the walls. Emily came through the first opening low and fast, her rifle already up and tracking. The automated defense turrets in the corners were trying to acquire targets, but Lisa's jamming device was scrambling their sensors. The turrets spun in confused circles, firing at empty air, while their targeting computers tried to understand what was happening. The first Vryn warrior realized his mistake and turned toward Emily, but David was already coming through the second breach. He fired 3 rounds in rapid succession, each one aimed at the weak points where the Vryn armor plating connected. The rounds punched through the gaps, and the warrior staggered backward, making a sound like metal scraping on stone. The second Vryn warrior was faster. He brought his plasma rifle up and fired, but Emily was not where he aimed. She had rolled to the side, coming up behind a piece of furniture, and the plasma bolt vaporized empty air where she had been. She returned fire, and her rounds caught the warrior in the side, spinning him around. The third warrior was the leader, the one who had taken Tommy from the classroom. He was bigger than the others, with scars on his armor that spoke of many battles. He did not panic like his subordinates. Instead, he moved with cold calculation toward the chamber where Tommy was being held. Lisa came through the third breach and saw what he was doing. She fired, but the leader was wearing heavier armor than the others, and her round sparked off his back without penetrating. He reached the control panel for the force field and slammed his clawed hand down on the emergency lockdown button. The chamber holding Tommy began to seal. Heavy blast doors started sliding closed that would trap Tommy inside and activate a separate life support system. Once those doors closed, it would take hours to cut through them. The leader was sacrificing his escape to ensure the hostage remained secure. Emily saw this happening and made a decision that bypassed all conscious thought. She dropped her rifle and ran straight at the Vryn leader. He was 9 feet tall and covered in armor that could withstand plasma fire. She was 5.5 feet tall and wearing light tactical gear. By any logical measure, it was suicide. She hit him low and hard, driving her shoulder into the back of his knee joint. The armor there was articulated to allow movement, which meant it was weaker. The impact knocked him off balance, and his hand slipped from the control panel. The blast doors stopped moving with less than a foot of clearance remaining. The leader spun with frightening speed, his arm sweeping around to crush Emily against the wall. She ducked under the blow and came up inside his reach. Her combat knife was in her hand in an instant. She drove it up and into the gap where his helmet met his chest plate. The blade scraped against armor, but found the soft tissue underneath. The leader made a sound of pain and rage. He grabbed Emily with both hands and threw her across the room. She hit the wall hard enough to crack the metal and dropped to the floor. For a moment she did not move, and the leader turned back to the control panel. But Emily was already getting up. Pain was just information. Her training had taught her to acknowledge it and ignore it. She had broken bones before and kept fighting. The hard impact was nothing. David and Lisa had finished with the other 2 warriors. They were not dead, but they were down and not getting up anytime soon. They turned their weapons on the leader, but he was too close to Tommy's chamber. If they fired, they risked hitting the boy. The leader reached for the control panel again. Emily ran at him a second time, but this time he was ready. His backhand caught her in mid-stride and sent her sprawling. He activated the lockdown and the blast doors began moving again. Tommy stood inside the chamber, watching everything with wide, frightened eyes. He had seen his mother get hit twice hard enough to kill most species. But she kept getting up. She kept fighting. And something in his young mind understood that this was what humans did. They did not stop. They did not give up. Not when someone they loved was in danger. Emily pulled herself to her feet one more time. Her vision was blurry, and she tasted blood in her mouth, but her hands were steady. She saw the blast doors closing. Saw her son looking at her through the gap. Saw the Vryn leader standing between them, confident that he had won. She pulled a flashbang from her belt and threw it. Not at the leader, but at the control panel. The grenade hit the panel and exploded with light and sound calibrated to overload Vryn optical sensors. The leader staggered back, his vision systems temporarily blinded by the intensity. Emily ran forward one last time. She did not try to fight the leader. Instead, she dove through the closing gap in the blast doors. Her shoulder hit the floor, and she rolled, coming up inside the chamber. She grabbed Tommy and pulled him close. The blast doors finished closing with a heavy metallic sound. They were sealed inside, but they were together. The leader recovered his vision and looked at the closed doors. For a moment, he just stood there trying to understand what had happened. The human had sacrificed her own escape to be with her child. It made no tactical sense. She had trapped herself in a room with no exits and no weapons. David and Lisa moved forward, covering the leader with their rifles. He looked at them and then at the closed blast doors. Slowly, he raised his hands in surrender. There was no point in continuing the fight. His mission had failed the moment the humans breached the room. Inside the sealed chamber, Emily held Tommy close. She checked him over looking for injuries and found none. He was scared and shaking, but he was unharmed. She pulled him into a tight hug, and for the first time since receiving the alert, 6 hours ago, she let herself feel the fear she had been pushing down. Tommy, we need to get out of here, she said. Quietly, the chamber had emergency supplies, including tools for basic repairs. Emily found a plasma cutter designed for maintenance work. It would take time, but she could cut through the blast doors from the inside. It was not a fast solution, but it was a solution. Outside in the main room, David and Lisa had secured the 3 Vryn warriors. Station security had finally arrived along with medical teams and about a dozen ambassadors all talking at once. Everyone wanted to know what had happened and what the consequences would be and who was responsible, but none of that mattered to Emily. She activated the plasma cutter and began burning through the blast door. The metal glowed red and then white as it melted. Tommy stood behind her watching his mother work with the same determination she had shown fighting the VRYNN. It took 17 minutes to cut through. When the door finally fell away with a crash, Emily stepped out holding Tommy's hand. The room beyond had gone silent. Everyone was staring at her, some with shock and others with something that might have been respect or fear or both. Emily looked at the station security chief, at the ambassadors, at the Vryn warriors, sitting on the floor with their hands secured behind their backs. She looked at each of them and said nothing. What was there to say? She had come for her son. She had taken him back. Those were the only facts that mattered. The galaxy had just witnessed something it had never seen before. A human mother fighting 3 of the most feared warriors in known space and winning not through superior strength or technology, but through pure stubborn refusal to accept defeat. They had seen what humans were willing to do when pushed far enough, and they were beginning to understand that humanity was not like other species. Not better or worse, just different in ways that would take time to fully comprehend. The medical team wanted to check Emily for injuries, but she refused until Tommy had been examined first. The doctors were Felician, with 6 manipulator limbs and diagnostic tools that could scan every molecule in a body. They checked Tommy thoroughly and declared him physically unharmed, though clearly shaken by the experience. Only then did Emily allow herself to be examined. She had 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, and severe bruising across most of her torso. The doctor treating her made clicking sounds of concern and said she needed to remain in medical care for at least 3 days. Emily thanked him politely and signed herself out after 2 hours. The galactic response began almost immediately. The Vryn Collective issued a formal statement demanding Emily Park be arrested and charged with assault on diplomatic personnel. They called the attack unprovoked and barbaric. They said it violated every principle of civilized interaction between species. Half the Council species agreed. Representatives from the Mandorian Alliance and the Crystalline Confederacy filed motions demanding immediate action. They spoke at length about the importance of diplomatic immunity and how letting this attack go unpunished would undermine the entire structure of galactic society. The other half of the Council suddenly remembered they had urgent business elsewhere. The Rothian Federation announced their representative was ill. The Halixian Concordance declared a period of meditation and withdrew from voting. The Felician Union simply stated they would abstain from any decision on this matter. What the abstaining species understood, and the others were beginning to realize, was that public opinion had shifted dramatically. Within hours of the breach, security footage had leaked onto the galactic networks. Not official footage that could be controlled, but recordings from personal devices from witnesses who had been near the scene. The recordings spread across hundreds of worlds. Billions of beings watched as Emily Park tore through defenses designed to stop armies. They saw her get thrown across a room hard enough to kill most species and watched her get back up. They saw her dive through closing blast doors to reach her child, knowing it trapped her inside. The footage came with commentary from military analysts across the galaxy. Experts who had spent their lives studying combat and warfare began breaking down what they had witnessed. They pointed out the precision of the attack. They noted the training and coordination of the human team. They highlighted the fact that Emily had defeated 3 Vryn warriors not through luck or rage, but through superior tactics and execution. Xenobiologists started pulling up every file humanity had submitted about Earth. They wanted to understand what kind of planet produced beings like this. What they found shocked many of them. Earth was categorized as a Class 7 death world. That meant it had environmental conditions and predator species that would kill most galactic citizens within hours. The biologists read about animals called lions and tigers and bears. They learned about creatures called crocodiles that could death roll prey underwater. They discovered that humans had lived alongside these creatures for millions of years. One popular galactic news program ran a special segment titled Understanding Human Evolution. They showed footage of Earth animals hunting and fighting. They explained how humans had survived, not by being the strongest or fastest, but by being smart and persistent and working together. They talked about something called persistence hunting, where humans would chase prey for days until the animal died of exhaustion. The program ended with footage of a creature called a honey badger, a small animal that would attack lions and hyenas and anything else that threatened it. The host explained that humans called this nature's most fearless animal. Then the host paused and added that perhaps humans had learned from creatures like this. The Vryn collective watched all of this with growing concern. Their carefully cultivated reputation as the galaxy's most fearsome warriors was being undermined by a single human mother. Worse, their intelligence services were now reporting that Emily Park was not an anomaly. Her training and skills were shared by thousands of other humans. Maybe tens of thousands. The Vryn military command began a comprehensive review of human capabilities. What they found was disturbing. Humans had been in space for less than a century, but they'd already established colonies on 16 worlds. Their ships were not the fastest or most advanced, but they were reliable and easy to repair. Their weapons technology was crude by galactic standards, but effective. More importantly, humans seemed to have an unusual aptitude for violence. Their history was filled with wars and conflicts spanning thousands of years. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet multiple times over. The fact that they had not used these weapons showed restraint, but also meant they understood very well how to fight and kill. 3 weeks after the incident, Emily Park received a formal summons to appear before the Galactic Council. She was to answer charges of assault, violations of diplomatic immunity, and endangering station personnel. The charges carried potential sentences ranging from exile to imprisonment on a penal colony world. Emily appeared at the hearing alone. She wore a simple suit and carried no weapons. She stood in the center of the council chamber while representatives from 300 species sat in circular tiers above her. The chamber was designed to make the accused feel small and insignificant. It did not work on Emily. The chief prosecutor was a Mandorian who had spent 40 years trying cases before the council. He presented his arguments with practiced skill. He showed footage of the breach and detailed the damage done. He brought expert witnesses who testified about the sanctity of diplomatic immunity. He painted Emily as a dangerous individual who had acted outside all accepted norms. When he finished, he looked at Emily with his compound eyes and asked if she had anything to say in her defense. Emily stood silent for a moment. Then she spoke in a clear voice that carried across the entire chamber. "You took my son. You expected me to negotiate, to follow your rules, to accept your diplomatic games. But there is something you need to understand about humans. We spent 1,000,000 years clawing our way to the top of Earth's food chain. We survived ice ages and plagues and predators that could tear us apart without effort. And the single consistent thing that kept us alive was this: we protect our children. Not with rules or protocols or diplomatic immunity. With everything we have, everything we are. You took my son. I took him back. Those are the only facts that matter to me. The chamber was completely silent. No one spoke or moved. They simply stared at this small human who had just told 300 species that their laws and rules meant nothing when her child was threatened. Finally, the ambassador from the Helian Concordance spoke. The Helians were one of the oldest species in the galaxy. They had seen empires rise and fall over millions of years. When a Helian spoke, people listened. "The human is correct," he said in a voice like wind through crystals. "We judged her species by our own standards and found them wanting. But perhaps we have been evaluating the wrong metrics. Raw strength and technological advancement are not the only measures of an apex species." This female demonstrated something we had not accounted for: the willingness to sacrifice everything for those she loves. This is not weakness. It is a form of strength we do not fully understand. The vote to dismiss all charges passed by a narrow margin. 73 species voted to acquit. 68 voted to convict. The rest abstained. Emily was free to go. The Vrin Collective filed a formal protest but took no further action. Behind closed doors, their leadership was having difficult conversations about humanity and how to deal with them going forward. The consensus was emerging that humans were dangerous in ways the Vrin had not anticipated. Not because of their military power, but because of their unpredictability and their complete disregard for consequences when certain lines were crossed. A directive went out through Vrin diplomatic channels. It was brief and to the point: human children are off limits for any purpose. The unofficial reasoning transmitted through back channels was simpler: it is not worth it. Other species took note and issued similar directives. Quietly and without public announcement, the galactic community began treating human families differently. Security protocols were updated. Diplomatic guidelines were revised. New rules appeared that specifically addressed the unique characteristics of human protective instincts. Emily Park returned to Earth with Tommy. She resigned from the diplomatic corps, citing personal reasons. The real reason was that she could no longer pretend to be diplomatic when she had proven so publicly that diplomacy had limits. But her actions had changed something fundamental in how the galaxy viewed humanity. They were no longer seen as a young species to be tolerated and managed. They were seen as something more dangerous and more valuable. A species that would fight to the death for what they loved and could not be controlled through normal diplomatic pressure. 6 months passed, and the galaxy had changed in small but significant ways. The incident at the Academy Station had become required study material at diplomatic schools across hundreds of worlds. Students from every species learned about what happened when human protective instincts were triggered. They studied Emily Park's actions not as examples of what to do, but as warnings about what to avoid. Tommy Park returned to school, but everything was different now. The other children treated him with a strange mix of curiosity and caution. Not fear exactly, but awareness. They knew his mother had defeated 3 Vrin warriors in close combat. They knew humans were capable of violence that most species only saw in entertainment media. A young Rothian student named Thela approached Tommy one day in the cafeteria. She had scales that changed color with her emotions, and right now they were swirling with nervous green patterns. She asked him if all human parents would do what his mother did. Tommy thought about the question carefully. He was only 7, but the last 6 months had forced him to grow up faster than most children. He remembered watching his mother fight through a wall to reach him. He remembered her getting thrown across a room and getting back up. He remembered her diving through closing blast doors, knowing it would trap her inside. Not all humans are soldiers, like my mom, he said slowly. But yeah, if you hurt their kids, they will come for you. Maybe not as fast or as trained, but they will come. It is just how we are built. Thyla considered this, and her scales shifted to thoughtful purple. She thanked Tommy and went back to her table. Later that day, her parents received a message from her asking questions about human behavioral patterns and family structures. They were not the only parents receiving such questions. All across the galaxy, families were having conversations about humanity that they had never had before. Emily Park had settled into a new life on Earth. She bought a small house in a quiet neighborhood far from the cities and spaceports. For the first few months, she tried to pretend everything was normal. She took Tommy to school and cooked meals and did all the ordinary things that parents do. But the galactic community would not let her disappear. Job offers arrived daily from security firms and military contractors and private protection agencies. Everyone wanted to hire the human who had defeated Vryn warriors. She refused them all politely, but firmly. Then one day she received a message that made her pause. It was from the Vryn Collective. They wanted to meet with her, not to threaten or intimidate, but to learn. They were offering payment for her time and expertise as a consultant on human behavioral patterns. Emily almost deleted the message. The Vryn had taken her son. They had caused her family pain that still woke her up some nights in a cold sweat. Forgiving them seemed impossible. But then she thought about Tommy and about all the other human children living on stations and colonies across the galaxy. If meeting with the Vryn could help prevent another incident like the one at the academy, then maybe it was worth swallowing her anger. She accepted the offer. The meeting took place on a neutral space station 2 months later. Emily arrived with David Kim and Lisa Chun. She had not asked them to come, but they showed up anyway. That was what family did. The Vryn ambassador was waiting in a private conference room. He was not one of the warriors who had taken Tommy, but Emily could see the family resemblance in his angular features and dark armor plating. He greeted her with a formal gesture that humans had learned indicated respect. When they sat down across from each other, the ambassador spoke first. His voice had been modulated to sound less harsh, but the words were carefully chosen. "We need to understand," he said. "Our analysis of the incident suggests your actions were not anomalous. Other human parents would respond similarly if their offspring were threatened." Emily leaned back in her chair and studied the Vryn ambassador. She could see he was genuinely trying to understand, not just gathering intelligence for some future plan. "Not all of us are trained soldiers," she said, echoing what Tommy had told his classmate. "But yes, you would get similar results. Maybe not as efficient, maybe messier, but the outcome would be the same. We would fight. We would keep fighting until our children were safe, or we were dead. It is not rational. It is not diplomatic. It is just what we are." But why, the ambassador asked. Other species care for their young, but not with this intensity. Most beings understand that individual survival is less important than species survival. They make logical choices based on probability and outcome. You do not. Emily thought about how to explain something that seemed so obvious to her but clearly was not to him. "Earth is a dangerous planet," she began. "Not just because of predators, but because of everything. The weather can kill you. The plants can kill you. Diseases and parasites and 1,000 other things are constantly trying to kill you. Human children are born helpless. They cannot walk for months. They cannot feed themselves for years. In any other species, this would be a fatal weakness. But we compensated," the ambassador said. "I have read the reports. Human family structures are designed for extended care periods." Emily nodded. "Yes, but it is more than that. Humans bond with their children in ways most species do not. It is chemical and biological and psychological all mixed together. When Tommy was born, something changed in my brain. My body released hormones that made me hyperprotective. My threat assessment became skewed toward anything that might harm him. This is true for almost all human parents. The ambassador made a gesture of understanding. So the intensity of your response was biological, not cultural. Both Emily said. Biology gives us the drive. Culture teaches us how to use it. But the drive itself, that is hardwired into what we are. The conversation continued for hours. Emily explained human evolutionary history and family dynamics, and the concept of maternal instinct. The ambassador asked careful questions and took detailed notes. By the end of the meeting, there was not exactly friendship between them, but there was understanding. The Vrin Collective hired Emily as a permanent consultant. Her job was to help them understand humanity and to prevent future incidents. She worked with their diplomatic corps, teaching them about human behavioral patterns and warning signs and boundaries that should never be crossed. Other species heard about this and wanted similar consultations. Emily found herself traveling across the galaxy, giving lectures and running training sessions. She taught alien diplomats how to read human body language. She explained why certain actions that seemed harmless to them were serious threats to humans. She made it clear that humans had limits that other species needed to respect. Tommy grew up in a galaxy that was slowly learning to accommodate humanity rather than expecting humanity to accommodate them. When he returned to the Academy Station for the new school year, he noticed the changes. There were new security protocols specifically designed around human families. Teachers received training on human protective instincts. Even the cafeteria menu had been updated to include more Earth-style foods. The other students still treated him differently, but now it was with genuine respect rather than caution. They understood that his mother had not acted out of rage or insanity, but out of love and protection. These were concepts that existed in their cultures too, but perhaps not with the same intensity. One day Tommy was walking through the station corridors when he passed a group of Rin students. He tensed, automatically remembering what their warriors had done. But the Vrin students simply nodded to him in a gesture of respect. One of them even spoke. Your mother taught us an important lesson, he said in halting English. Strength is not just physical power. It is also determination and love and refusal to surrender. These things we did not understand before. Tommy nodded back, not quite ready to forgive, but willing to acknowledge the attempt. The galaxy continued to turn and humanity continued to integrate into it. But now the integration was on more equal terms. Other species had learned that humans could not be bullied or intimidated. They had learned that threatening human children was the fastest way to turn peaceful diplomats into dangerous enemies. And, perhaps most importantly, they had learned what the old saying about honey badgers really meant. Honey badgers do not care about size or strength or odds. They fight because that is what they do. They protect what is theirs with absolute determination. Humans were the same. They were not the biggest species or the strongest or the most advanced. But they were the species that would walk through fire for their families. They were the species that evolved alongside creatures that should have killed them and learned to survive anyway. They were the species that refused to accept defeat when something precious was at stake. Emily Park stood at the gate, and the apex predators learned their lesson. You could be faster or stronger or better armed, but none of that mattered against an opponent who simply would not stop. Ever. The galaxy remembered this lesson. Teachers passed it down to students. Diplomats shared it in private briefings. Military analysts included it in their threat assessments. And parents of every species looked at their own children and wondered if they would have the same fierce determination if tested. Most concluded they would not. But they respected humanity more for having it. Years later, when Tommy was grown and had children of his own, he would tell them the story of their grandmother and the Vryn warriors.